Welcome back to SJ's classes. This is my second video lesson on Malayalam literature in English translation. In the previous video lesson, I discussed O.N.V. Kurup and his famous poem A Requiem to Mother Earth. If you haven't watched it, please do watch it. In this video, I will discuss yet another Malayalam poet, and that is Balachandran Chullikkad. The poem that I will discuss as part of this video is Chullikad's famous poem Evide John, which is actually the Malayalam title. It was translated as Where is John by K. Sachidanandan. Let us go into the poem. Before we move into the poem, let us have a very brief introduction to the poet. Chullikad is a renowned Malayalam poet who hails from Paravur, which is in the Ernakulam district of the state of Kerala. He has published some of the remarkable poetry collections in Malayalam like Padinettu Kavithagal, which came out in 1980, Amavasi, that was published in 1982, Gesel, which came out in 1988, Manasandram, which was published in 1994, Dracula, that came out in 1998, etc. In his earlier collections, like Padinettu Kavithagal, you find that the poems are marked by their deep and complex sense of despair, self-doubt, and persecution mania. The same mood recurs in his later collections such as Amavasi and Gesel. But his readers state that his voice has become somewhat mellow after the 1980s, as indicated by the poems included in his later collections like Manasandram and Dracula. He was also a man of great importance. He participated in many national literary seminars organized by the Central Academy of Letters, India. He was one among the 10 members of a cultural delegation of India which was sent to Sweden in 1997, being invited by the Nobel Academy and Swedish Writers' Union. He represented Indian poetry in the International Book Fair in Gothenburg, Sweden, which was held in November 1997. As you all know, he is also a popular cinema actor. He has acted in films like Rapagal, Parundu, Three Kings, Mr. Fraud, action hero Biju, and Welcome to Central Jail. He has also acted in numerous other films, but I quoted these as I know that you must be familiar with these titles. Balachandran Chullikad entered the poetic scene in the late 1970s as a representative of the decade's angry young men. He became famous even before the publication of his first collection of poems through his public recitations of poetry, which had earned him a number of admirers, especially among the youth, in the politically turbulent days of the late 1970s. His poems are marked by grotesque imagery that sheds light on the sordid, unpleasant reality around him. We also come to understand that Balachandran Chullikad has quite consciously experimented with the language of his poetry and has a variety of verse forms, including some drawn from oral poetry. He returns to traditional metrical patterns in his later poems, a practice that has at times been read as an index of the poet's growing disenchantment with the forms of political radicalism he once espoused. The poem Where is John was written in 1988 and reproduced from the collection Manasandram. It portrays the poet's grief and despair over the premature death of the radical filmmaker John Abraham. John Abraham was a popular Malayalam Indian filmmaker, short story writer, and screenwriter. His famous films are Vidyarthigale Idile Idile, Amma Ariyan, and the Tamil hit Agraharathil Kazhudai. He is known to have led a nomadic life, but he was a genius as far as filmmaking is concerned. Chullikad enjoyed a deep friendship with this character. Thus, the early loss of this film genius, the grief that Chullikad experienced as part of this loss is recorded in this poem. The poem also becomes a meditation on the deep and meaningful relationships between individuals. Let us start reading the poem. In this video lesson, I will read the first 3 parts of the poem. Let us start with the first part. O city of yellow evenings, hold me in your electric embrace. The metallic fleet of my angry youth sails towards your port. They have no flags, only sawdust and blue vitriol in their cells. O city of yellow evenings, hold me in your electric embrace. So at the very outset of the poem, the poet declares that he needs consolation. And to whom does he ask consolation? To the city of yellow evenings. The poet declares his despair state. The yellow color is normally associated with hope and happiness. The poet is in a state of despair and is probably looking for some hope in what he sees around him. And what he sees around him is the city with yellow evenings. And he asks the city to hold him in with its electric embrace. Probably the poet is trying to convey the idea that he is filled with emotions and he wants the city to console him. The metallic fleet of my angry youth sails towards your port. The poet's angry youth period is coming to an end. As I said earlier in the introduction to Chullikad, Balachandran entered the poetic scene in the late 1970s as a representative of the decade's angry young men. And I also stated that later on, in his collections like Manasandram and Dracula, his voice became mellowed. Perhaps he is hinting at this change in his outlook towards life. Perhaps he is hinting at the change in his attitude towards life. He says, the metallic fleet of my angry youth sails towards your port. They have no flags. Now, the flag of a ship is something that proclaims its identity. It shows its nationality. Chullikad here says that his metallic fleet sails towards your port without any flags. Probably he is pointing at the identity crisis that he is experiencing. The person he was before and the person he has now become. He is probably hinting at an identity crisis. And what does his ship has at present? Sawdust and blue vitriol. That is all that the ship has in its cellars. Sawdust, as you know, are fine particles of wood made by sawing wood, and blue vitriol is a compound used mostly as insecticide and fungicide. So what remains in the poet are leftovers. Leftovers of the poisonous elements that perhaps he had as part of his angry youth. Please don't awaken in me those midnight streets where my prodigal adolescence and the lilac songs of my liquid guitar had supped the nectar of your neon spring and rocked in love dance. The poet says, "Don't, please don't awaken in me those midnight streets." The poet is probably asking the city not to remind him of his previous life, not to remind him of his previous experiences, not to bring about his old memories. Don't awaken in me those midnight streets where my prodigal adolescence. Prodigal means recklessly wasteful. The poet is perhaps trying to say that he recklessly wasted his young age. He made a waste out of his young age. Where my prodigal adolescence, adolescence as you know is that period between puberty and adulthood. And that is the particular time period which the poet states that he has wasted it. And he has wasted it on songs and music. That is what perhaps he is trying to point out. Where my prodigal adolescence and the lilac songs of my liquid guitar had supped the nectar of your neon spring and rocked in love dance. So probably he is hinting at the fact that he has made his young age, his youth, into something which cannot be used at the present time, which has become a waste as far as his present life is concerned or present state is concerned. There is nothing that he has made in his past which he could make use of at the present time. Where my prodigal adolescence and the lilac songs of liquid guitar had supped the nectar. Sup means to take food a little at a time, to eat food gradually. So these things were gradually eating up his young age, his adolescence. Today marks the end to those voyages, long, sad and disturbing. Today I come in search of a man christened John in the Gospels, without an address, hungerless, shadowless. Today marks the end to those voyages, to all the good times that he had as part of his adolescence, his previous good experiences. Today marks the end to those voyages, long, sad and disturbing. Now when he looks at his previous life, when he looks at the past events that he came through, the past experiences that he went through, he says that they are long, sad and disturbing. And today he has come in search of a man. Now this is where he points out the reason for his grief. He has come in search of a man who is named John in the Gospels. So christening, as you know, is that particular function associated with the Christian religion whereby you which assign a specific name to a child. And the man was christened with the name John. As you know, you have Saint John, who is the fourth of or who has written the fourth of the Gospels. He was the son of Zebedee and Salome, and they were fishermen. So you have a Christian reference over there. Today I come in search of a man christened John in the Gospels, and what is his present state? He is without an address, he is hungerless and shadowless. And there the poet conveys the actual state of his friend. He conveys the idea that his friend has passed away because he doesn't have an address now. He is hungerless and shadowless. No human can be hungerless. No mortal can be shadowless. So he passes on the idea that his friend has attained immortality, or to be specific, his friend has passed away. Let us move into the second part of this poem. The day dies. The sad wakefulness of the city pours into the sodium night. Street, a river of figures. Solid stream of fractured forms. My brazen eyes seek the mad metaphor of fragmented life in the turbulent passage of life's journey. Chemical messages ascend soot-laden genetic stairs. So at the very outset of the part 2 of the poem, the poet says that the day is coming to an end. The day dies. The sad wakefulness of the city pours into the sodium night. Wakefulness, the lively nature of the city, is being described as sad. Probably that is because you have a crowded city, you have a very busy life as part of your city life, and that is being described as sad by the poet, where the crowd is so busy that it has no time to look at the sorrow, the grief shared by a particular person. And in this context, it is the poet that is sharing his grief. Probably that is why the poet says that the wakefulness of the city is sad. The day dies, the sad wakefulness of the city pours into the sodium night. The sodium night here refers to the night time which is lit by the sodium vapor lamps. Street, a river of figures. Look at how he describes or picturizes street. A river of figures. And how does he describe these figures? Solid stream of fractured forms. The river is actually a collection of all the people that are walking here and there. And this stream, this river, is a solid stream which has a definite shape. But the figures are actually fractured, which means they are broken into pieces. Though it might seem on the outside that everything is in an ordered state, internally a chaos is there. Probably the poet is bringing out the chaos and confusion that he is feeling in his mind. He sees that in the crowd outside, in the figures that moves around outside. My brazen eyes, brazen means made of brass. My brazen eyes seek the mad metaphor of fragmented life in the turbulent passage of life's journey. So the poet says that his eyes is seeking the mad metaphor of fragmented life. Now, the fractured forms are symbolic of the disorder that he is experiencing, the unrest that he is experiencing, and this unrest and disorder has probably come out of the grief that the poet feels for his dead friend, and he sees this in all that occupies the space around him. So his eyes are seeking the mad metaphor of fragmented life. Fragmented means disjointed, something which has become unconnected. So his eyes are looking for mad metaphor of fragmented life in the turbulent passage of life journey. So the passage, the life journey, the journey you take from birth to death is being described as turbulent, full of difficulties, full of hardships. And his eyes, even though it sees fractured forms around, it is looking for symbols that point out the fragmented life in them. Chemical messages ascend soot-laden genetic stairs. The poet is referring to the chemical communication that happen in our body between cells. Probably it refers to the occurrence of thought or coming of memories. By seeing the fractured forms that fill the space around him like a river, he thinks about his past, he thinks about the events of the past, and a flood of memories come to him. Coming to part 3 of the poem. House number 20, the same room, a lone candle burns. Maria, who had in bygone days knocked my planets off their orbit with the sparkle of her eyes, lies smouldering on the bed of insatiable desire. I ask her in a whisper, "Where is John?" Back comes the reply, "I am not his keeper, you may leave." So, at the very first part of this poem, the poet had declared that he has actually come in search of a character who is christened John. His state is also explained in the part 1. He is now without an address, he is hungerless and shadowless. So the poet is going around seeking for this man. And look at the place that he has come to. He has come to house number 20, the same room. Probably the poet has visited this house earlier. A lone candle burns. So probably it's lit for the character who has passed away. Maria, who had in bygone days knocked my planets off their orbit with the sparkle of her eyes. Look at how appealing this character was to the poet earlier, but as of now, she doesn't influence him. Maria, who had in bygone days, earlier days, past days, knocked my planets off their orbit with the sparkle of her eyes, lies smouldering on the bed of insatiable desire. Insatiable means impossible to be satisfied. So earlier this character used to knock the planets off their orbit. She used to influence the poet very much. But as of now, she doesn't attract him. She is lying on the bed with insatiable desire. And the poet asks her, "Where is John?" The reply comes immediately, "I am not his keeper." She says, "I am not someone who is in charge of other people. I am not someone who is in charge of the man named John. You may please leave." So this is the response that the poet gets when he goes to Maria to inquire about this character called John. With this, we come to the end of this video lesson. In the next video lesson, I will discuss part 4, 5, 6 and 7 of the poem, "Where is John?" I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.